Welcome back. So this is the third video of three. In the first video, we sort of broke down, basically it sort of shows the problem or the thing that needs to be navigated. And that is the mind tends to be metabolically very inefficient. From the time that we wake up, from the time that we go to bed, in the ways that we think, we tend to think all day long. And that thinking drives behavior, it drives emotion, and the tank is empty. And when the tank is empty, not only do we not have enough to go, but we still try and we push ourselves. And that creates a type of pressure, and the entire system starts to break down. But from that, a person sometimes, oftentimes, either and or start to identify with it themselves, or they're judged by their behavior when what is actually occurring is a result of having a low metabolic energy tank. And I say metabolic energy, but it's also, spiritual energy. And when I say metabolic, we're talking about physical ATP. And we brought out that the brain uses 20% of our caloric intake, despite just being 2% of the size of our total mass. But what we haven't talked about yet is that what is occurring isn't just something to talk about. It's not just an idea. It's not just occurring in some sort of energetic structure per se. It's very physical. And the more that the burnout is the word that we used. So the more that the mind is moving, if we're not giving it breaks, if we're not learning to harmonize this default mode network and task positive network, or focused action with a focused mind and the mind going back to energy conservation in the default mode network, if we don't find balance between these two mechanisms, then we tend to just default. And the things that we default to deplete our energy. So it's this cycle that kind of just keeps repeating, where what we're doing is draining our energy. And because we don't have any energy, is influencing what we're doing. And that just continues in a cycle. And then, lo and behold, we start to identify with that cycle. Maybe that cycle gets labeled as lazy. After 3 p.m., can't get him to do anything. He's lazy after 3 p.m., or maybe he's lazy all day, is the label that the person is given. But I actually don't think, and this is something I bring out in another book that I'm writing, I'm not so sure laziness exists. I'm not so sure that's actually a thing. What I observe is energy dynamics, and energy not being conserved, energy being wasted, energy being spent in ways that are not efficient and sometimes even beneficial. They're not beneficial. Sometimes it's just downright detrimental, some of the things that we use our energy on. And this starts to have a physical result. And the physical result can be seen, it can be measured. The hippocampus, an area in the brain that is very important for memory, it starts to shrink due to prolonged levels of cortisol, which is our stress hormone. So what happens, and we talk about this in other videos, when we go to the default mode network, it's wired for safety. So a person who isn't looking for, birds in the sky that are going to attack them, or bears or lions, then that brain doesn't really have anything to look out for. It tends to, in our modern world, just go to worrying and just go to thinking about the past in a way that doesn't benefit their present. And the mind starts to do that. And the more that it does that, the more that we get stressed. And that stress creates a type of cascade effect that has a physical result on the human brain. Simultaneously, you have the amygdala, which you could say is a part of your brain that is responsible for detecting threats in the environment. And when the amygdala is overactive, then it kind of gets stuck in a mode of searching for danger, finding threats, even where no threats exist. So then the human mind is starting to look at everyday things as a threat. It's not neutral anymore. It's either this or it's that. And then of course that leads to more emotional state, and then that just leads to more of a cascading effect. Hippocampus keeps shrinking because the cortisol is going crazy, because all day long we're stressed out from overthinking and overworking, and that's what we call the burnout. A cognitive burnout, a physical burnout, and if you want to talk about it that way, a spiritual burnout ensues as well. I used to think that when this occurred, because I wasn't looking at it as energy dynamics, I was just looking at it as I'm lazy. I must be. That's what people are telling me. I need to resolve that with more willpower, is something that I used to think. That I just need to generate more willpower to force myself to get this done. But now wait a second. Willpower. But we already said you don't have any power. Like, you're out of energy. What is this mystical willpower you're talking about that you're trying to use to overcome whatever obstacle or whatever thing that you're trying to do or get done? Maybe it's 5 p.m. and you have to cook the meal, but you don't have the energy in your tank. And so you're like, well, I'm gonna just do it. I'm gonna drive through it. I'm gonna force myself. And I'm gonna hate it the whole time. Well, now you're using your energy reserve, the energy that you had way back in there, for when you really needed it, or even actually just to fuel and nourish your body. That energy is needed elsewhere, right? If the brain is using 20%, well, then the rest of the body is using 80%, and we need that to be in a relative harmony. So it backfires when you try to use that willpower and you're trying to force yourself through something when you're already tired. You're continuing to empty the tank. And then what happens? The brain goes back to default. And then what happens? Typically, we do something that isn't really that great for us when we go back into default. We start munching, or we just start watching TV, or we just start scrolling social media because it's entertaining the mind. It's sort of numbing a mind that just doesn't have the energy to focus and get things done. But we don't have to identify that as that or with that. That's not who we are. That's not, we didn't come out of the womb, in this low energetic state. In fact, the opposite. Came out very, very high energy. So this entire everything we're talking about, I mean, everything is like a stream or like a current that is moving towards something. One of the things that I think is important for the world to understand, especially for those who don't, I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only one who has realized this, but as above, so below. What we see in the micro, we see in the macro, and what we see in the macro, we see in the micro. It works both ways. One of the things that you can observe about the human brain on the micro level is that when a neuron isn't firing, when the sodium potassium exchange has not yet began, the neuron is in a state of energy potential. It is charged and ready. And as soon as that cascade begins, of course, it can't be stopped, and it's in action. And then now you have your cause and effect, and then that neuron fires, which causes another one, and then another one, and now you have a pathway. The idea is that the human being can reflect that dynamic. And I think it's actually one of the most important things for a human being to understand is that we can be in a state, a default state, in fact, not of worrying and thinking and going back to just these menial things that we do when we're in default mode, like scrolling and arguing and watching commercials that we've seen 100 times. We're just sitting there looking at it and staring at it, and we're just in this void. We can change that default mode to a state of energy potential, just like the neuron. We reflect that, the micro and the macro. So the micro is the neuron resting at energy potential, and then the macro is the human brain at a state of resting energy potential. And I think in some ways, mindfulness are pathways to help get there. But I think the way that mindfulness is often taught and explained, there's not enough active element because we alternate between. The reason that we're at resting potential is because we're saving that energy so that when it's time to act, we can do so efficiently and we can do so with more power, more energy behind it because we're not coming from a state of wasting our energy. And we've just been spending a lot of time talking about that, what that is. The mind is constantly churning in this default mode that doesn't benefit it, and it's creating heat and it's creating pressure, and eventually it breaks down. Our hippocampus is shrinking. All of these things are occurring. So what I'm suggesting is that the human being can actually learn to change that dynamic and find a resting state of energy potential, ready to act, ready to perform some sort of cognitive task that's necessary. Maybe it's a creative task. Maybe it's uh, a human connection type of task with the mind that we want to make, such as really listening and showing up for somebody. Maybe we really want to do that, but when you don't have the energy for it, it's really hard to listen to a conversation or show up. So what I'm recommending or what I'm suggesting is that we can create a type of idle state that isn't, such as, what are you doing? I'm just zoned out, chilling. That's not what I'm saying either. It's more of a vibrancy. It's more of a connective type of feeling, but it's a state of active energy potential. And that's done through practice and it's done through conserving energy, not wasting it where it doesn't need to be wasted. Because it never needs to be wasted. I mean, when does it need to be wasted? But not wasting it, using your energy potential in a way that is effective and efficient and beneficial to you and others and the world around you in general. Now, there's lots of different ways to start training this. I think that mindfulness is an okay place to start. I have another way, and it's called the Four Directions of Attention. It's a practice that is derived from ancient types of medicines and ancient types of thinkings, indigenous types of thinkings fused with modern neurology and psychology. That's cool, I think. That kind of brings us to, well, what do we do? Like, what's really the point then of all of this? Well, we create this resting state of energy potential, not as a place to escape to, not as a place to arrive at and then just like try to live there. The resting state, the high energy potential resting state is the moment of space in between the actions. So it gives us more potential to work with when we need to use that energy. And what does that do? It relieves the pressure. It helps prevent the buildup of heat. And then we can start using our mind in more efficient ways, which lends to using your mind in more efficient ways. And then you start to change that dynamic of the snake eating its tail. Like it's still the same dynamic, but you've retrained it to do something much different than what the world has trained it in a state of default. And what does that sometimes lead to? Productivity. It leads to continuity. It leads to consistency. It leads to better health. It leads to more energy. So, learning to create a resting state of action potential and then using your action potential in a very deliberate and intentional way is the way that the human species will evolve with self-awareness and a type of consciousness of itself that isn't really occurring because the human being is in a state of energy degrade and low grade cognitive states where it's repetitive, it's habitual, it's not making you feel well, or it's just a quick reward that leads to a longer decay and more decay, more heat, more pressure. So it's kind of like, well, the choice should be pretty easy between these two dynamics. Do I want to be in constant emotional turmoil? Do I want my default mode network to look for problems and constantly try to find deficiencies and kind of scan for danger constantly, even when it's not there? Or do I want a default mode network of active, vibrant, resting potential that gives me the opportunity to act in a way that is highly conscious, highly self-aware, because we've created that state of resting potential? That's what this is all about. It's about taking back the human mind through the fabric of consciousness, which is attention. All right, next week, I think it makes sense to go into further understanding of this decay state because it is the most common state of human cognition in the world, I think, represented is this state of cycle that creates more decay in the default mode network. The default mode network is the source of that decay, not because the default mode network is bad, but because we have only learned to default towards things that don't give us more energy. They don't, it's a cycle that just feeds itself. And one of the things that I was lacking for a very long time was the sense of any type of deep work. And I mean, if you're a painter, your deep work is painting. If you're a philosopher, your deep work is philosophy. If you're a rapper or a movie star or an athlete, that's your deep work. Maybe you're a jack of many trades or a Jill of many trades or whatever, a person of multiple interests. And now you can do multiple things really well. That's possible too. But so you have many avenues of deep. And what do we mean by deep work? It's you're giving it a lot of yourself, your energy, your light, your consciousness, your focus, your creativity, your essence. And a type of quality will come from that focus and care that you put into the thing, whatever it is. And that's the deep work, the focus and the care to create quality in the deep work, whatever that deep work is. And I say deep because it's, we're putting ourselves into it. We're really taking it further, at least for ourselves, maybe not for the whole human species. You have to be a good painter for that, but maybe you're just constantly learning to improve and push your own boundaries of what you think or what you thought you could do. So everything has been sort of leading up to, well, what is really going on? What is really the cost? And so that's something we'll talk about even more depth next week when we talk about that sometimes, it's not even just you're not just affecting deep work. There's no such thing. I didn't really have anything that I was passionate about for a long time. It was in the background, but I wasn't able to focus on it because I wasn't practicing. Okay. Well, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you guys again soon.